Now, hello guys, I do hope and pray that you're fine wherever you are. I welcome you again to this platform, and I want to apologize for being away and being unable to post videos on this platform for quite a while. I did post a video on this platform arguing that I was facing some personal issues that I had to deal with, and I want to say that is the primary reason why I have not posted on this platform for some time now. Now, that aside, I want to talk about a critical aspect of Africa's development, which is healthcare. Now, in 2001, 45 heads of state converged in Abuja, Nigeria, and they came up with something which was later known as the Abuja Declaration. Now, Abuja Declaration of 2001 had several provisions, and one of the primary provisions of Abuja Declaration was the need for all African countries, and to start with the 45 African countries that attended the conference. The 45 African countries that attended the conference agreed that they would be spending at least 15% of their gross domestic product on healthcare. Now, this was a proposal by these governments, by these heads of state, to improve the state of healthcare in Africa. And they did agree that they would be spending at least 15% of their GDP on healthcare. Now, since 2001, it is over 20 years now since this proposal was put into paper. Now, I wanted us to assess how far African countries have gone in implementing this provision of the Abuja Declaration of 2001. How far African countries have gone to allocate at least 15% of their GDP on healthcare. Now, we all know that the state of healthcare in Africa is not good, and we all know that it is only in Africa that we have the highest mortality rates of women and children. In fact, according to World Health Organization, every day in 2020 there were at least 800 women who died from preventable causes related to pregnancy and childbirth, and also there was a maternal death reported in every 2 minutes in 2020. Now, when you look at the statistics that the World Health Organization provides, it states that almost 95% of all maternal deaths occurred in low and lower middle income countries in 2020. And when we talk about low and lower middle income countries, we cannot shy away from talking about Africa. And the World Health Organization also states that Sub-Saharan Africa and Southern Asia accounted for around 87% of the estimated global maternal deaths in 2020. And Sub-Saharan Africa alone accounted for around 70% of maternal deaths, which is equivalent to 202,000, while Southern Asia accounted for only 16%. Now, we can see that Africa, the state of healthcare in Africa, is worse, and it is worsening. Now, we need to question how far have African countries gone with the implementation of the Abuja Declaration of 2001. Have African countries been able to allocate at least 15% of their GDP on healthcare? Now, let me start with my country, Kenya. We just want to be very specific and assess how much these African countries spend on their GDP. And being a Kenyan, I want to start with Kenya. Now, if I look at the statistics in Kenya, if I look at the current statistics in Kenya, it is clear that the Kenyan government has not been able to meet the Abuja Declaration of 2001. Why am I saying so? Because Kenya's healthcare spending for 2020 was, they are saying that $83, a 3.1% decline from 2019, and the spending was about 13.76, which I really doubt. Which I highly doubt. If, let me check the expenditure in 2023. Now, when you look at the government's expenditure in 2023, the healthcare expenditure in Kenya was expected to be around 4.25% of GDP. I think this is now very correct. Kenya is spending 4.25% of its GDP on healthcare. Now, the Abuja Declaration of 2001 stated that African countries, including Kenya, needed to spend at least 15% of their GDP on healthcare. And we have just found that Kenya, being a member of Africa and being a member of African Union, spent only 4.25% of its GDP on healthcare. That is significantly low, I may say so. Kenya, we have found that spent 4.25 on healthcare in 2023. Let us go to South Africa. South Africa, according to statistics available online, in 2020 South Africa spent 8.58% of its GDP on healthcare. That one also, we can see that South Africa failed to meet the at least 15% provision. Let us look at our closest neighbor, that is Uganda. If we look at Uganda and its expenditure on healthcare, we find that Uganda's expenditure was around 4.7% of its GDP. That is very close to the expenditure in Kenya. Let us look at Rwanda, which is one of the highly developing countries in Africa. Rwanda was expected to spend 6.16% of its GDP on healthcare by 2023. Let us go to West Africa a bit and let us talk about Congo. Congo spent around 2.30% of its GDP on healthcare by 2023. Let us go to Egypt, which is located in North Africa. And according to available statistics, Egypt, just a minute, Egypt spent an average of 5.3% of its GDP on healthcare. Let us go to Libya. And when we look at the case of Libya, I think it is just the same. there is no difference with the countries that I have just mentioned. Now, from the few countries that I have mentioned, I can see that the likes of Angola spent 2.91% of its GDP on healthcare. Algeria spent 6.32 on healthcare, and there was another country, African country, Benin, 2.59, Botswana 6.19, Burkina Faso 6.72, Burundi 6.50, Cameroon 3.77, Central African Republic 9.40. That is, I want to say, the highest that I have seen. Egypt 4.36, Equatorial Guinea 3.77, Eritrea 4.09, Eswatini 6.51, Ethiopia 3.48, and Gabon 3.43, Gambia 2.61, Ghana 3.99, Guinea-Bissau 8.41. That is also another higher figure. And many African countries. Now, from just the simple review that I have given, it is clear that African countries are still short of achieving the Abuja Declaration of 2001. If the state of healthcare is to be improved in Africa, then I think that the Abuja Declaration of 2001 should be achieved. African countries must, and I say must, allocate at least 15% of their GDP in healthcare. If that is done, then I think the maternal deaths will be reduced and child mortality will be reduced, and I think the general state of healthcare in Africa will be improved. One of the significant definitions of development in Africa is healthcare. I think the state of healthcare defines how improved or how a country has grown. If the state of healthcare in a country is, let me say, higher, there is very low number of deaths, women dying from pregnancy related complications, children dying due to lack of access to healthcare, and the general population dying from lack of accessibility to healthcare and lack of resources, quality healthcare services, then allocating more funds to healthcare sector, I think shall and will improve the state of healthcare in Africa. We know that in Africa we have, let me say, higher level of corruption, and in most cases the funds which are allocated to these sectors, more so to the healthcare sector, are in most cases embezzled. We can see, and there is a common argument in Africa today, which happened during the COVID-19 pandemic. In my country, Kenya, they call them the COVID-19 billionaires, when the politicians and civil servants squandered money which was allocated to improve the state of healthcare in the country. I think that such things like corruption and the embezzlement of funds affect the state of healthcare in Africa. But This aside, I think this can be dealt with. This aside, governments must strive and allocate at least 15% of their GDP on healthcare. Governments must try and allocate more funds to the healthcare sector to ensure that there is adequate resources, there is adequate services, and there is adequate manpower to manage the healthcare sector in these various countries. In the near future, we shall be talking about development and growth in Africa if the state of healthcare is improved. In the near future, we shall be ranking Africa's development and growth based on the state of healthcare. If the state of healthcare is improved, then we shall say that Africa has grown and Africa has developed. My final urge to African governments is for them to comply with the Abuja Declaration of 201 provisions, and one of the primary provisions of this declaration demanded that African governments and African countries allocate at least 15% of their GDP on healthcare. I think this should be done going forward.